Give me a second. Perfect. Okay, so it's good to see everybody here today. I hope you're having a good day wherever it is in the world that you are currently located. It sounds like there's a lot of different folks from all over, which is always great with these webinars. I really like to see the whole kind of world be represented in a really neat way. So it's good to have everybody here. So what we're going to talk about today is from the minimum viable platform to scale. What is the minimum viable platform and how do we get it beyond that state? What's really important is that a lot of the things that are inside of this are related specifically to not just how to strategize around it, but how to talk about the MVP. Some of these concepts may be familiar to a lot of people here, but this is always an evolving thing. As we learn from the hundreds of MVPs we do here at Humanitech, we're changing the philosophy and modifying it in ways that make sense to our customers as well as the platform engineering community as a whole. So we'll go through that shortly. So like Maria said, my name is Mallory. I'm the Director of Customer Success here at Humanitech. I'm a software engineer by background, who got involved in DevOps against my own will, which seems to be the way a lot of things work in the tech industry, and I realized there was a lot of problems with it, especially as a developer and having to learn these technologies were really outside of my day-to-day on a normal basis and made things really challenging. So when I joined Humanitech, it was very exciting to be able to actually solve some of these problems. So what I want to go over today is 4 key areas. So we're going to look at what is a minimum viable platform, why it's not a traditional MVP in the sense of minimum viable product, how we separate out small and medium business versus enterprise adoption concerns. And this is really going to be important if you are worried about how to talk to your teams about this and how to get buy-in on a platform engineering initiative. There's going to be some key things in there that will help you understand what you need to do. Countering adoption problems is also a really important section, and it is mostly focused on enterprise, but there are a lot of things that are applicable to SMBs as well. These are also things you can prepare for in advance and have as part of a contingency plan that does make selling a platform engineering initiative internally much simpler. And then finally, I'm going to show you a sample large-scale adoption plan that is based on one of our customers. It's a neat one because of the way they approached things and how we worked collaboratively on it. So I want to show that to you as well. And like Maria said, there will be lots of time for questions at the end. So feel free to pop those in the Q&A and we can get to those once we're done. I'll try and leave as much time as possible. So what is a minimum viable platform? Realistically, it's not a minimum viable product. When we decided to name it, we wanted to do something that was both familiar and unfamiliar. The reason it's a minimum viable and separating it from a product is that the platform is the very specific thing we're talking about here and very much driven by outcomes, just like platform engineering is as a philosophy. So it's really important that we differentiated that when we decided that was what we were going to call this program, this philosophy. What it is, it's a way to show the value of your platform engineering initiative very, very quickly. And the way it does this is by working with a pioneering team that can lead the way on innovation. So when you're thinking about designing the MVP and when you're thinking about who the first people inside of your organization are that are going to be using it on a day-to-day, this is the sort of team that you want to look for. A team that has a representative infrastructure stack, a representative pipeline, and a representative application. So we'll talk about that, but if it's something that can sort of touch a lot of different areas that are used commonly across your technical landscape, that's very important. But it's also a team that's really interested in pushing new ideas forward, being excited about new ideas, and is ready to take on some of the problems they face and find solutions. So what we're going to do is build a highly simplified and representative first version of an IDP, an internal developer platform, in the context of like a hello world for that particular pioneering team. So the idea is that once that's built out, those guys can deploy day to day within non-production environments in order to get rolling and to be able to showcase something very quickly. I also focus specifically on non-production environments because that is incredibly important to remember. Inside an MVP, I will never recommend touching production, and I'll kind of explain to you why later on. We also want to come out of this with a product-like roadmap for iteration and growth. The idea being that this is a product. You should treat it like one. That is one of the key fundamental elements of platform engineering philosophy, and this is no different. You should come out of it with not only a technical roadmap, but an adoption plan as well, a way to move forward beyond just that first pioneering team or business unit. And having this plan will make it easier to get buy-in down the road. On that note, having the influential stakeholders, so the people that can sign the yes, we will give you budget for a platform engineering initiative, having those people involved early enough from day one, understanding these are the problems you're trying to solve and this is the way you're going to solve it is incredibly valuable. Get them excited, get them on board fast, and maintain that excitement by updating them regularly. If your team has a light bulb moment, send that off to them. That's super key. The other thing, and I keep saying it's my most favorite part of this whole thing, but in reality it is that you avoid having to win over every single technical team right away. You have time. It's a safe, lower risk way of taking this initiative and scaling it up inside of an organization. And that is so important. And it's one of the biggest fears we have when people come to us wanting to build an IDP with Humanitech at the center. They're very afraid of adoption, very afraid of scaling because it means a lot of change. If you can change gradually, if you can change slowly, it is a much safer, more sustainable process. So I think I've gone on about this ad nauseum many, many times, but I think of 4 key things when I look at building an MVP. Sometimes you'll just see this broken down into 3, but I want to leave innovative in here when I'm talking to you because you are here because you're innovative. So we'll leave that in. It should be representative. Like I mentioned before, it should have basic resources and components that are common across a majority of your technical estate. You want to think of 80% of your use cases, not your 20% outliers. So have your common database types in place, your basic CI/CD that everyone touches. Your application structure should be consistent with what is common across the org, and your ingress and DNS, like stuff like the basic networking should be representative of how applications are accessed or used inside of your org and out. It should be repeatable. So the idea isn't just that we take the MVP process and build you this micro version of an IDP and send you off. What you actually are also getting is a process you can repeat again, again, and again. You can use all of the 4 phases of the MVP every time you need to onboard a new team or business unit. It's meant to be repeatable. It's a quick start, and it's a way of thinking philosophically about onboarding. It's iterative, so that's really key, and it's important to think about iteration when you're doing this at all times. You will not solve every single problem in your MVP or even in your first year. You have to think about the future, but you need to start small. So keep that in mind. And then finally, it needs to be innovative. It shouldn't just be, rehashing the same old things you've built before, this static, very boring platform that no one's going to touch. Think about inspiring, not undermining the people that have to touch it. They should want to use it. And we'll look more about that as well. So one of the reasons why you should consider going this way with platform engineering initiatives is because it's going to help you avoid the common pitfalls people run into when they start doing platform engineering. There's 4 key ones here that we see a lot, but there are many more. However, these are the ones that come up the most common, and these are the best practices we use to counteract them. This is part of the process that's built in. You certainly can and should use these best practices in any sort of business case you write up for starting a PE initiative, because you're effectively doing a risk analysis. You're flagging the minefield. And you're saying this is something we could run into if we did this another way, but if we do it this way, we avoid it. So rushing complexity, I think, is an easy one to get caught up in. You want to solve all of your problems immediately. You want to make sure every team's use case is covered. But what happens is you just fall down a rabbit hole and there's never any time for someone to use it. In platform engineering, just as in software engineering, there's no such thing as done. It's all about iteration. But there's a point where it needs to go out the door in order to be used and to actually start getting the feedback on it. So we recommend starting small, iterating, and growing. Embrace the continuous improvement mindset, and you will avoid this. But you have to start with that from day one, from the time you start planning until you're ready to onboard the rest of your company. You have to start slow. Another thing people commonly do, and a mistake they make, is they focus just on the tools and the technology. So what happens here is you get so stuck thinking about, well, I need to integrate Kafka and I need to make sure that we also have 4 different types of databases in, and oh, hey, there's this static database that's on a mainframe server somewhere we need to touch sometimes. That's great, but if you just focus on that, you're going to miss the point. The whole magic of platform engineering as a whole and of internal developer platforms is that it supports the idea of a golden path, a way to do things that is not painful, that is easier for everybody involved, and that makes things work quicker. Track usage and adoption, focus on the golden paths, and maintain this mindset of being outcome focused. If you think about being outcome driven instead of just focusing on technology, you're more likely to have this bought into by the key stakeholders in your org. If you just think about technology, there is no way most CEOs want to hear about Kubernetes or CI/CD pipelines. They don't care. They care about how fast things get to market and how fast they can make money next to your competitor. Another pitfall is that you build a platform that people don't want to use. So I think this happens a lot. We have a ton of customers coming to us saying, hey, we built this IDP. None of our developers want to use it. They hate it. What have we done wrong? We've spent millions of dollars. Oh my God, this is horrible. Generally speaking, this is because they're not focusing on the right level of abstraction. They're not abstracting responsibly. When you abstract, you need to think about doing it with purpose and not just doing it for the sake of putting a black box around things. And developers, you don't need to think about that. Don't worry about it. It works because it does. What you actually need to be doing is centering your abstractions around the pillars of productivity, impact, and satisfaction. It is surprising what happens when people actually touch a platform they want to use. Suddenly, they have a lot more ideas about how to make other parts of the company better or of their day-to-day, just outside of engineering as a whole. It's a really surprising thing that does come out of it. And that's a great segue into my last one, is that some people will make the mistake of thinking developer experience is only about application developers. And that's never about anyone else, but that is just simply untrue. When you start thinking about pioneers and champions, you start building a community, but you have to think just beyond developers. If developer experience is improved, who else benefits? Often there's a business case that benefits. It's faster time to market. Like I said, your CEO probably cares more about getting product out faster, more stable, so that you can make money faster than your competitor. Your finance department cares that you've now optimized process and reduced the amount of overhead required for that process. Your security team now feels a big burden lifted off their shoulders because they no longer have to sit and worry about every single deployment. That is building a community, and that is building excitement around the IDP. So avoid those pitfalls by taking these best practices to heart. So while the underlying principles of all this are going to be the same, no matter what your business is, no matter what your scale is, when it comes to enterprise versus small, medium businesses, the big difference is in adoption, is what happens once you go beyond MVP. So let's look at that a little bit because I think there's a lot of questions that always come up about this, and it's really important. There's really a lot of differences between the two types of businesses that I think are very important to keep in mind, mostly related to operational parameters. So if we look at technical complexity, our enterprises tend to be very high technical complexity. They tend to have a lot more legacy systems involved. There tends to be a lot more requirements around security and standardization and all these other layers that SMBs don't tend to have. They tend to be low to medium in their technical complexity, less moving pieces, and much more agile and able to make changes. Organizational maturity is sort of the same way. SMBs are early to mid-stage, and enterprises are a high level of technical and organizational maturity. They tend to have better change management policies in place, and they may also have it structured by business unit rather than the company as a whole, which is always very interesting. Resource allocations in SMBs is also small. So this means human resources. How many people can you dedicate to building this thing? In SMBs, the folks that are working on these tend to be splitting their role with other things that they're doing. So maybe they're an SRE as well. Maybe they're actually a platform or an application engineer. Their responsibilities are split. And when you're building an IDP, you have to keep that in mind. Your timeline may be longer. On the enterprise side, we see dedicated teams I work with teams every single day that are entirely dedicated to building out this IDP. That is their job. Their job is all integrating Humanitech right now, and they're 100% focused on building out this platform. And that's really cool. It's not often you get that in small and medium business, but occasionally you do. Business initiatives also are slightly different. In SMBs, the big focus is on growth and product. So making your product amazing and getting that market share. Whereas in enterprise, you're focused on growth and profitability. So making that product that now has market share actually profitable. And that does change sometimes the business objectives you have to align with. So keep that in mind. And with all those things in mind, your adoption timeframes and your stakeholder tie-in does change as well. For small and medium businesses, we expect often that they can do this stuff in less than 10 months across their whole organization because their stakeholders are involved in day-to-day operations and able to make decisions quickly and move fast. There's less things to break. There's less people to work through. There's less teams to think about. Whereas on the enterprise side, you're looking at more than 12 months to get an entire organization onboarded to an IDP. And the important stakeholders that have to be the ones to make decisions tend to be involved at a distance, if at all. That's why it's so important to engage them early and get them involved. So enterprise adoption does present some specific challenges. Now, these things can also come up in SMBs as well, but I want to focus on enterprise because it's the most common thing I get asked. Technical complexity in these orgs is absolutely massively increased. It covers a lot more ground. There's a lot more going on. Technically, the estate is huge, and there's also a lot of different components. They require a lot higher level of stakeholder management for the entire organization to adopt, and this is more than just a CTO signature on something or, yeah, go ahead, do it. There's a lot more involved here, and you have to be aware of that and think about that when you're going through the MVP process. So adoption at enterprise scale must be well planned and well managed. It's much less flying by the seat of your pants, much less, yeah, we'll figure it out when we get there, or we'll fix it when it hurts. It has to be from day one thought about and well executed and managed throughout the process. Otherwise, it will fall flat on its face. I mentioned the 80%, 20% scenario earlier. Sometimes in enterprise, 20% of the outliers may actually be very critical components and should maybe be considered sooner than later. I'll go into this a little bit more, but this is a very interesting thing that sometimes happens. You need to consider the integral parts of your technical sphere and decide who needs to go first and appropriately prioritize. And the final thing, and the worst part, is that legacy systems are just a part of enterprise estates. They cause a lot of grief. They're very painful to deal with, but they're there and they're not going away. So how do we actually face these challenges? So the first thing we need to do is make sure that the stakeholders that we have at a high level are engaged about the value we are trying to achieve and the return on the investment they are going to make very early on. Make sure you are able to build into your success criteria, as we like to say in customer success, something that allows the stakeholders that are non-technical to understand the why, the value, not just the financial value, but the intrinsic value, and what the return on their investment will be. There are ways to calculate this. We have a calculator on our website that you can take a look at. It's really important to have this, and I can't stress that enough. The next thing you need to do is plan around technical complexity with a focused, phased project plan and roadmap. I build a project plan for every single one of our customers that goes through not just our MVP, but our production readiness process and beyond. Even if someone doesn't start with an MVP and has already done it on their own, I want to make sure we are highlighting what needs to be done for them and really helping them align on the project management side. And you should do this too. Your roadmap should also look at what is going to be required for different teams down the road and how and when you should integrate that based on what's logical. You're not going to bring in crazy networking before you have the basics of networking installed for a majority of your users. You're not going to bring in You're not going to necessarily bring in ephemeral environments until you've established that your development and staging environments are exactly where you need them to be. It all depends on what your needs are, but you have to think about these things. It's also critical to have a strong aligned project management team between your platform engineers and your application engineering teams. When you are starting to think about onboarding beyond the MVP, this is critical. It will fail if your PMs aren't aligned. They aren't working together on trying to achieve the same outcomes. And even during an MVP, this is still really critical. your project managers on the teams that are working on that MVP really need to be on the same page. And like I said about that 80-20 strategy, start thinking about that outlying 20% early on and build a migration strategy specific for them. The important thing in it here is that it's cyclical. Don't do them all at once, but gradually think about how you can cycle them through onboarding and make sure that you are adapting to that 20% need. I still prefer to think about the 80% first because it's going to be where a majority of your challenges are. But there may be circumstances, like let's say you have a CDN network that you need to be able to have ready to go in order for everyone else to succeed. Maybe that's what you do first. And that's how you have to think about it. And finally, consider where and if legacy systems fit in at all. If there are initiatives to move away from these, see if you know about them. Maybe those teams that have to move away from it sooner than later and on to cloud native are the ones you want to talk to first. And that can influence how you prioritize adoption. So let's go a little bit more into detail on engaging your high-level stakeholders. So I want you to think outcome focused. Start this early. Share your project plans, share your Jira boards, share your Notion pages with the appropriate folks in management and adjacent organizations like security and finance with very clearly defined success criteria and outcomes. Don't just talk about technical, talk about the why, talk about the what. What are the problems you're trying to solve? How are you going to solve them? And how are you going to measure whether or not you did it? That's critically important here. Align your outcomes with business priorities. So this could be something like time to market, revenue-driven priorities. This could be something like reducing costs, for example. So a lot of things you can think about here, but make sure you align your platform engineering projects with this. Regularly report on progress. Don't get stuck in the idea of, oh, we'll show it to them later. Show it to them now. If there are wins, if there's key light bulb moments from the team, show it to your high level stakeholders. I can't tell you the amount of times that I've seen an individual contributor developer reach out to like a CTO or a CEO and say, this thing is amazing. I now have so much time back. Thank you for pushing this through. Or, hey, I really need this. My day-to-day sucks, and I've seen a way out. So make sure you can do that. Schedule demo updates as part of QBRs. So often enterprise high-level stakeholders, management level, will have QBRs, so quarterly business reviews. They'll look at the projects that have been worked on that quarter, any business success or failures in that quarter, do all sorts of analysis. This is a great time to schedule a demo and to showcase what you've built and how it works. Think about getting involved in those if you can. And like I said, show ROI as you see it. Time is money. Processes that reduce time for common tasks are big cost savers. You can think about this from the computing perspective as well. If you have optimized, if your code is optimized, if your software is optimized, it's less pressure on a computing system. And it's the exact same with money. The more optimized a process is, the less money it costs to run. It may be a bigger investment in the beginning, but in the long run, it pays off. Like I also mentioned, you need to align your PMs with the migration plans. So it is absolutely critical that they are aligned on outcomes, goals, objectives, and all those fun things, and that your PMs between your application developer team and your platform team are aligned on making the timelines, aligning on the phases of the MVP, overcoming the roadblocks that often come up. That's just really critically important in order to make sure that things get done collaboratively and that no one's left behind. Building a migration plan is also really important. It needs to consider not just how you're going to time adding new teams on, but also how the technical complexity of those teams will need to be met by the platform along the way. So the best way I like to think about it is in iteration cycles. Each cohort of teams or apps or business unit that you bring on should go through a similar process. And in fact, you can actually recycle the phases of the MVP in order to do this. It's very, very cool. So legacy services, the last thing I wanted to touch on in a little bit more detail, because again, I get asked about this probably every 2 days. They require some deeper thinking as a technical org. There are some enterprises, there are some big businesses that have a plan for replacing legacy services and some don't. There's so much of banking that runs on mainframes, and in a lot of circumstances, they're not wanting to move away from it until they absolutely have to. It's a big cost, it's a big lift, it's a big risk. So you need to know what's going on with those legacy services inside your org. If there is a plan for gradual sunsetting and replacement, start new projects as greenfield on the IDP. Be best practice with those folks from day one. And if you want to look at how to prioritize what teams you bring in to your IDP, I would maybe start here. If there are people migrating into cloud native, they're worried, they don't really know how to touch Kubernetes, they're afraid to even think about what it is, those are the people you want to start with. They're greenfield. If they're rebuilding this stuff anyway, you might as well show them how to do it correctly from day one. If the legacy services are to stick, they will never align with platform engineering philosophy or fit into the 12-factor app model. This is really important for what we do here, and obviously they're unlikely to also be containerized. So eventually, when the rest of the organization has transitioned and everything's been streamlined, it is maybe possible that a sunsetting plan can be in place. It'll be easier to sell them on that, your organization, but don't make this a priority. If those services need to stay in place and there's no plan to migrate off them anytime soon, focus on everybody else. So let's look at what an MVP plan looks like with not just the MVP inside of it, but the pilot kind of thought process as well, and an adoption plan for a larger scale enterprise. So what we try to think about is putting the MVP program in its phases. And just as a reminder for everybody here, the 4 phases are discovery, where you're going to look and make sure that you are able to solve, that you can identify the problems you are trying to solve and that you understand the scope of what you're going to do there, keeping in mind what I said earlier about keeping it simple. The second phase being integration of the platform. So starting with your base architecture and getting your environments set up. The third phase is also another technical phase, and this is for the deployment process. So you're going to bring in your applications, your CI/CD, your secrets management. That's all very critical into that third phase. And finally, the fourth phase is this transition between what you see here, where it says MVP and PRP. PRP on our side is the production readiness program, but it is also just known as production readiness. And what that means is that you aren't necessarily in production, but you could be. You're ready to do it. Maybe you just haven't pushed the button yet, as it were. And the idea is that moving into that production readiness is built upon at the end of the MVP in the fourth phase. I would say if you are thinking of doing a proof of concept, you need to consider this combination of the MVP as your starting base and then moving towards production readiness, which has a lot of the kind of adoption best practices I've talked about today as part of it, at least in our standard. But no matter what, you need to think about adoption into logical phases and cycles. So you need to take your developer needs, the best practices in the industry, and the existing tool chain you have, and bring it into this MVP program. Once you've done that, you can start looking at how you're going to bring in new adopters and new features. And each time you do that, you'll go through this cycle again to get the feedback, to prioritize the new features, and evolve your IDP accordingly. I would say for a majority of people, the MVP can be done in a maximum of 8 weeks. And the production readiness side, depending on your security requirements, can take 8 to 12. So you can get pretty far pretty fast here, depending on how quick you can move. But thinking about at the end of it all, you should be able to identify the key value and where it aligns with business objectives is still going to be very important. So this is a sample of how we can get a customer and how we've actually had a customer go from the MVP all the way through into the production readiness side of things in a very brief period, in approximately 90 days. So throughout this whole period, we started in February with them till about mid-May. We've only just finished a lot of their training and technical enablement. This is where we make sure that their trainers know how to teach using the IDP. We help them write documentation. You can see how we've broken this down. Now, this team was able to work very quickly. The deeper discovery phase than we would normally do for just an MVP, but you can see that we started thinking about going beyond it right from day one. So we thought about a first application coming in a period of essentially a sprint, and then a second application in a longer sprint because it was slightly more complicated. And then we started really making sure the infrastructure components worked dynamically, which is part of what Humanitech offers specifically. We then, after that, took time to go for this production readiness preparation. So we started with security integrations to harden the system. We started with CI/CD environment optimizations a little bit earlier than normal. And then finally, the golden path. We got that user feedback and decided to iterate. So now where these guys are is inside of the production readiness side of things, which is very, it's fun to be in with a team that is so engaged. And the advice I can give you, if you want to move this quickly, is to have a plan in place early on and to understand what your problems are that you need to solve very, very early. The thing that has worked really well with this particular team is that they knew very clearly what the problems were they needed to solve and how they needed to align it with business initiatives to get it to take off. So that's very critical. So that is it for today. So now it's time for questions. I will stop sharing my screen and we'll go from there, and I'll hand it back to Maria.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mallory. Once again, super insightful presentation as always, and looking forward to your questions, guys. I hope they will be very good as always. So the first question is regarding identifying pioneering teams. Sorry, I cannot pronounce. How to identify such team if you have development teams with markedly silo customized developer workflows through integrated to a common CI/CD pipeline?
Yeah, so that's the thing where what I would generally recommend in that case is doing a bit of a user experience survey. So looking at kind of essentially what we would use as a CSAT survey in customer success, but like, how satisfied are you with your day-to-day? Scale of 1 to 10. What are your comments? What are the things you find tough about your job? Even siloed, I think you will find consistent problems across teams. And generally, they're not related to a particular technology. They're related to more of an overarching feeling of it's too complicated for me to request a database access, or I right now feel like there are too many steps for me to go through to do something very basic. Those are the sort of things we hear all the time. Or we'll hear something like, I always feel like I have to learn the newest cloud technology, but also keep on top of the language I work in and the framework I work in, and it's just too much. So that's the kind of stuff you want to look for, and look for a team that has very solvable problems within that platform engineering philosophy. So maybe they want better uptime. Maybe they want faster iteration. Maybe they just want to be able to have more automation in place. That's the kind of stuff you want to start looking for, sideload or not.
Yeah. While you guys are typing out your other questions, just wanted to add in that Mallory will also be speaking at the biggest platform engineering conference, which will be in just 2 weeks, PlatformCon. It's virtual, it's free. It's June 10, June 14, if I'm not mistaken. And if you still haven't registered for it, I would recommend you do. And I just put in the link in the chat if you want to do it right now. Let's go back to the questions here. So once again, we'll share the recording and slides with everyone. I see that someone asked for the link to the ROI calculator. Mallory already sent it over in the chat. Yeah, let's go back to the question from Andy. And I know that you mentioned it on the slide later on, Mallory, but Andy is asking, like, do you have a pitch deck available for platform engineering MVP use case or C-suite presentation? Is it something?
I don't have a publicly available one, to be honest with you. Mostly because they're tailored to specific use cases. So the general outline of something like that, an executive briefing, it depends on the organization type, but as a general rule, what I would recommend is that you focus in on the business objectives and how you are working to meet those. Stay really, really high level from a technical perspective. In most circumstances, you are going to lose everybody if you start talking about actual technology. Focus instead on the problems you're solving and why they are important to the business and why they align with what those executives really care about. Sometimes if you aren't really sure what is important to your executive team, you may want to go look at a shareholder briefing. Often they'll talk about different initiatives inside of those. So they'll talk about, engaging technology, reducing costs. Sometimes it's, wanting to outcompete someone. Those are the kind of things you can start looking for and start working against. Maybe one day we can do a generalized one, but right now I customize them pretty heavily for our customers. So I unfortunately don't have one to share.
But still, Andy says, thank you. Cool. Let's go to the next question. When building MVP, what aspects should be focused more? I don't know.
I'm not sure of the context in terms of aspects, so might help to get a bit of clarification there.
Yeah, I see. I'm planning to build a new API with a fake news detector as main concept. So should I start this by with MVP? I guess that's the concept.
If it's just you working on, if it's a single developer project, it's going to be really tough to put an IDP in place. It's not always the best idea. From the concept of you're one person, like if it's just a passion project, I wouldn't always do it. I do it with my stuff because it's important for me to be able to interact with our technology and the framework around it. But I would say for like individuals, it's a little bit more challenging. It doesn't necessarily make sense until scale. If, however, you are going to do this and scale out to a team of more than like 2 people, then absolutely start from day one with this concept of MVP. So for an example with Humanitech, you could definitely set it up, just use the UI, don't necessarily touch the API, and you score for your deployments, make it easy for yourself, have that record of infrastructure requests and changes over time inside a Git repo, because you know that at some point someone else needs to see it. I would like, I'm not going to discourage you from doing it because it is quite fun, to be honest, to play with, even as an individual. But, just remember that real value from platform engineering as a whole does come out at scale inside teams.
It always does. How do you identify a cloud platform that needs to be chosen, for example, Azure, AWS, GCP, apart from considerations of teams or people's choice? What should be the main criteria?
I do not advise on this, and there's a couple of reasons why. My opinion will never be right, and that's because no one's opinion is ever right on these things. And 2, because there are parts of each of them that are valuable to an organization. So some organizations are very Microsoft heavy, and they're of course going to be on AKS, and I have no problem with that. And then you're going to get, people to which it's very important that there are a lot of different product offerings available, and pretty much everything can be covered, in which case you might look at Amazon. And Google is, I would say, kind of not as popular as the other two in a lot of senses, but at the same time is very useful, and has, I would say, a very approachable way for a smaller team that's newer to this to approach building this stuff. But at the same time, I don't recommend one of them over the other. It really depends on your org. It depends on what kind of deal they give you, because that's a big thing with these guys too. They shop each other all the time. Like Google might come to an AWS shop and offer them a really wicked deal. Happens all the time. And it's just sort of, how do you get sold at is really what it takes.
Yeah, good. Great comment. Do you say minimum viable product is too different from minimum viable platform, and how?
Minimum viable product implies a much larger scale than what you should actually be thinking about. So I would, in this case, think of minimum viable product as that combination of the MVP itself and that production readiness stage. So that's starting to think about adoption stage, that may be touching production infrastructure stage. That would probably be your minimum viable product. Your minimum viable platform is called that because it needs to focus very specifically and very narrowly on a particular set of problems in a particular team. And I wouldn't put it under the product umbrella yet because it's still too small. Once you start iterating on it, yes, then you can probably call it an actual product. But for now, I would focus solely on the problems that it is trying to solve.
Yes, guys. focus on the problems. What is the typical composition in terms of technical skills in a platform team? Would this be synonymous with the product team having UX, PMs, solutions architects, platform engineers, database, DBAs?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question because I'm not sure that there's really one standardized way to do this yet. We see a lot of different variations. So like some of the customers I work with every day have this interesting mix of like SREs, a platform engineering team, and then there's a separate team of cloud engineers. And it's very interesting how they either work together or they don't. I'll tell you the organizations where they work together are the ones that are easier to work with, but also have an easier time with things. The ones where they're really disconnected and super siloed and they don't talk to each other, it's really nonsensical. Like, oh yeah, they determine what our Terraform repos look like. We don't get to touch any of it. We just have to use it. Well, that kind of sucks. You might want to be able to modify things for what you're doing. And if you can't, that really blows. It's not a fun time. I'd say a good platform engineering team again is depends on how you structure your teams to begin with, but for the most part, it should be made up of people that align with the platform engineering philosophy. It's not just a job title. So I think this happened with DevOps. It's not just a job title, and you can watch any of the DevOps is Dead talks I gave about this. It's not a thing you buy. It's not a job title. It's actually a way of doing things. And platform engineering is the same. It's not just a job title. It's a way of thinking. I think when platform engineering certification courses start coming out, there may be more standardization as people get a little bit more aligned on exactly what that philosophy is and become certified in it. Those are coming. I do know this for a fact. And that might kind of align the structure of those teams more. The skill sets, though, generally are people that are YAML camels. They can look at a YAML file and not throw up, which is really nice. They understand the way infrastructure needs to be layered and why it's important to think about infrastructure in the context of solving problems, not just existing. They understand that an IDP, a platform, is not just a toy. That's also really important. And that their job is actually they're essentially customer service people. That's really what they are. And I think that is there's that human level of platform engineering that I see more and more coming up with the teams we work with, that these are people that are really legitimately involved in essentially customer service, servicing their developers who are their customers.
Perfect. Yeah, Andy is asking for a course. Let me look for a link to sign up to get on the waiting list.
Yeah, there was a waiting list.
Yeah, I'm gonna look for it and add it now. But any other questions, guys? Let me see. Mallory, when you run the MVP programs, what do you see are the main pain points that people are trying to solve with this platform engineering initiative that they're running?
Yeah, and you know what? I love this question because we started noticing patterns. No matter the size of the org, no matter the vertical they were in, the patterns are the same. Developers hate their day-to-day. They're really not happy. That's number one. I will say that is the thing that comes up consistently. They hate waiting for stuff. They don't like ticket ops. They're sick of having to, jump through 30 hoops that happen to be on fire in order to get something basic done. That's really tough. The other thing that comes with that is onboarding is very hard. Onboarding is very challenging in kind of a non-centralized platform in our non-centralized system. That becomes an issue too. The other thing I see a lot is that there's a serious need to increase time to market. Often I get a lot of, we go through the discovery with people, we start talking about business initiatives, and they're like, and we're exploring kind of their technical problems. And I'm like, so what you're telling me is that you need faster time to market. And they're like, actually, yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, that's what the CEO said. And I'm like, there you go. That's what that is. That comes out an absolute ton. Development teams need to be able to move quickly and not wait. Another thing we get that I think is very interesting, and I'd be curious to explore further, is that the perception of ops teams is that they are a bottleneck and an annoyance, and they want that to be fixed. Now, that's kind of tangential, and actually, sorry, it's actually parallel to the other problems, But on its own, it's a thing. It's a philosophical thing. If it's dev versus ops, that's a problem and you need to fix that. So it's often this like psychological kind of organization mix that's really interesting. So that I see a lot. The other thing I see a lot too, obviously, is wanting to increase standardization by design, which also influences a higher security posture and also allows for more automation and being able to make more.
Mallory, I think we lost you. Sorry. We heard standardization, and then
Did it come back from you?
yeah.
There we go. Okay. So yeah, like I was saying, those are the common stories that come up very consistently, no matter the size of the org. I can basically talk to them for 30 minutes and know exactly which of those they'll be in.
We can schedule another session when everyone can share their
Like
story.
therapy. It's like therapy.
Yeah, true. Okay, so with that, I don't see that there are.
There is another question, actually. Sorry. There's a follow-up. So who tests the deliverables? Good question. So I would recommend, so what we do when we run these internally is the team I work with the customer, they're going to be testing the deliverables. Chances are with their developer team that's going to be touching this thing first. Do you feel that promoting from dev to production is now a faster process? Do you feel like requesting a database now takes less time? Do you feel that your day-to-day experience could be better with this? Can we demonstrate a potential return on investment here with the time reduction we're seeing? Those happen with the stakeholder team that we deal with when we deal with our customers. Excuse me, and on your side, I would recommend the same. No worries.
With that, I don't see any other questions. And as I promised, we're gonna quick response. What would you recommend for a scale down infrastructure locally? For example, on Mac, so that not to incur costs of cloud.
Don't deploy to Kubernetes. I mean, for my own personal projects, and I'm probably not the best person to ask about this because I did not formally study computer science. I'm entirely self-taught, so I don't have the best theoretical knowledge. But for me personally, I just use Docker, honestly, on my machine to run the things I need to run. And then when I go to deploy it, I use that Docker image when I deploy to either Kubernetes or a VM somewhere, sort of depending on what I'm doing. Honestly, I would, for like individual projects, I would not touch I wouldn't touch like cloud resources for an individual single thing. It's a lot. It becomes very expensive. Ask me how I know. I ended up with a $1,500 bill once by forgetting to turn a GCP cluster off. So
I would cry.
it was not great. It wasn't a good time. I did not enjoy that. You don't want to know my local stack. It's embarrassing. We're not going to talk about that.
Yeah, MVPs, yes, but local stack. Next.
It's just I'm very set in my ways. Like I'm a PHP developer, guys. Like it's been a long time. Yeah. See, we don't talk about local stack except for the fact I use Docker and I use JetBrains IDEs. That's all I'll tell you. But yeah, PHP 5 is a memory for me, a long forgotten memory. I will say 8.2 is really nice. You should try it. The PHP Foundation needs to pay me at this point, I'm convinced. But anyway.
Very cool. Okay, React.
I also do use React, but yeah. Anyway, cool. Thank you, everybody. Always the best questions come out of these, and it's great to sort of be able to update everybody on how we've tweaked things through the process and what we've learned. So glad you're all along for the ride.
Nice. Thank you so much, Mallory, once again. And yeah, we'll send over slides and recording in case you want to share with your manager or your colleagues. And with that, hope everyone has a great end of the day as I'm being hit by the sun here. And yeah, see you next week. Cheers.
Yeah.
Bye.